Nowhere to Call Home by Cynthia DeFelice, Chapter 17. Frankie and Stewpot walked to the railroad yard. This time they approached by the west end to catch a train going in their direction. They encountered a small group of hobos headed the opposite way and stopped to talk. There were 5 men of various ages. Frankie couldn't tell how old they were, really, but they were a lot older than Stewpot, she decided. With them was one girl. It was hard to tell her age, too, because of the dirt that streaked her face and the hat that was pulled down low over her forehead. Frankie guessed she was 15 or 16. The girl's hair was long and tangled, and looked as if it hadn't been washed in a very long time. One side of her face was horribly scarred. But what struck Frankie, causing her to stare without realizing it, was the lifeless expression on the girl's face. Her eyes were hollow and dull, her mouth a thin, flat line. She took no part in the discussion and didn't even seem to hear any of it, as Stewpot, Frankie, and the men talked about their travels, the time of the next train, and the likelihood that the bulls would be watching it closely. The girl stood staring blankly, seeming to see nothing at all. "That freight's got a waybill posted for St. Louis," offered one of the men. He pointed to a train on the other side of the fence. "Leaves in an hour or so, but you'd better go down past them shacks to Flipper. Us, we aim to head south, maybe to Knoxville." "Been there," said Stewpot. "If you drop off by the water towers outside of town, there's a jungle there, unless it got busted up anyways." "Right, let's go," one of the men said. He and his companions turned and began walking along the tracks toward the other side of the yard so they could catch a southbound train. Stewpot and Frankie turned to leave as well, but the girl just stood where she was. One of the men came back and grabbed her roughly by the arm. "Move it, Plain Jane, or we'll leave you here for the dogs." At the mention of dogs, a grimace of fear passed over the girl's face, and her hand moved to touch the scars on her cheek. Obediently, she turned and walked with the man to join the others. Frankie watched them, a peculiar feeling in the pit of her stomach. That girl. What's she doing with those men? "Same as us," Stewpot replied. "On the drag." "Why with them?" "Doesn't know anybody else, I guess," Stewpot said. "But they aren't very nice to her," protested Frankie. Stewpot looked grim. "It could be a lot worse for her, Blue. You see, Frells on the road got it tough. Unless they're tough. Even then, they usually find somebody like those guys to hang with. At least she's got food this way and protection." "But who will protect her from them?" Frankie wondered but didn't say. "They didn't seem to care about her much, so why did they let her hang with them?" she asked. Stewpot shifted uncomfortably and stuck his hands in his pockets. "Look, Blue," he said, "there's lots of stuff goes on that isn't very pretty. Let's just say they get what they want from her, and she gets what she needs from them. Okay? Let's go." Silently, Frankie followed him to the spot where the other hobos had suggested waiting for the train to St. Louis. She was thinking about what Stewpot had said. While she didn't understand exactly what he'd meant, the whole incident had made her glad that she had disguised herself as a boy. Mrs. Bailey, it seemed, had been right about the dangers to girls on the road. Frankie was cold. Inside a shed that blocked the wind, she brushed the snow off some logs that had been cut and piled up, and sat down on them. Stewpot joined her. Frankie's heart was so full that she was afraid to talk for fear that she would start to cry in earnest. Stewpot, too, seemed to be in a somber mood. They sat silent, huddled against the shed, trying to ignore their damp feet and the cold that crept through their clothing. When the whistle blew and the train appeared in the distance, Frankie got up. She knew that once again she was going to have to flip the train, but she was too chilled and downhearted to be scared. Besides, it felt good to move, to know they were going somewhere. For the moment, she forced herself not to think about where she was or what she was doing. She tried to think only about the next place, St. Louis, and to make getting there her goal. The train was moving very slowly, and Frankie jumped on board more easily than the first time, although she still couldn't imagine how Stewpot did it, with no hand waiting to grasp his and pull him onto the platform. This time the effort of flipping the train seemed to have tired him. He nodded toward the door handle and Frankie pulled on it. It opened. As she began to slide the door, she joked half-heartedly, "I hope it's a heated car this time instead of a reefer, Stu." Stewpot slid the boxcar door open the rest of the way, and they stepped inside. It was empty, on its way back to a yard somewhere so it could be loaded again. In the corner was an overturned barrel, and there were some ashes scattered about. Frankie guessed that other hobos had occupied the empty boxcar before them, and had made a fire in the barrel to stay warm. "I sure wish we had some firewood," she said with a nod toward the barrel. "Yeah, or some coal," Stewpot agreed. He spread out his blanket and lay on his back with his hands behind his head. He looked pale and tired. Frankie had noticed that he'd begun coughing from time to time. a deep hacking cough that shook his whole body. But he managed his usual cheerful grin. Still, this ain't too bad. At least there wasn't no stew bums or crazies in here already. Frankie set down her bag and lay beside him on the blanket, using her bag as a headrest. "Hey, what kind of food did that lady give us?" she asked. "Well," said Stew Pot, sitting up and opening the sack, "for me, there's buttered biscuits with jam, meat and cheese. For you, let's see. I think yep, one donut, hard as a rock." Frankie grabbed the bag from his hand. "Give me that," she said with a laugh. "Don't tell me you're hungry already after that sit-down we just had," said Stew Pot. Strangely enough, Frankie was hungry. She was always hungry now, it seemed. But she closed the top of the bag and set it aside for later. "I just wanted to know what we had," she said. The train began to pick up speed and soon settled into its steady rhythm. The rocking of the car was lulling Frankie to sleep when Stew Pot spoke again. "Me and Murph was gonna go partners on the farm. We used to talk about it all the time." Frankie wanted to ask what happened, but waited. If Stew Pot felt like telling her, he would. "Every beau you meet says he ain't never gonna be a bum. Murph said it all the time. Look down on the stew bums and tomato can vags and jungle buzzards, drinking rot gut and beggin'. Don't they got no self-respect," he used to say. Stew Pot was quiet for a minute, then his voice grew angry. Then something happened to him. Started hoisting the booze himself. Murph! I couldn't believe it. He laughed when I talked about the farm, and said it would never happen. "They'll never let us get nothing," he said. "Who's they?" Frankie asked. Stew Pot shrugged. "I don't know exactly. When he was drunk, he'd get raving about them. Thought all the swells and all the stiffs in politics and just about everybody who wasn't a bum was against him. Said for the likes of us, it's always going to be hard times." "Where is he now?" Frankie asked softly. Stew Pot didn't answer for a long time, and when he did, he spoke in a voice filled with pain and bewilderment. "He drowned in his own puke in a flop house in Detroit." A gasp of horror escaped before Frankie could stop it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. They rode for a while in silence. Stew Pot had told Frankie about Murph, and that had made her feel good. It made her want to confide in him too. She didn't want to pretend any longer to be someone she wasn't. It didn't feel right to be keeping such a big secret from Stew Pot. It felt like lying. And there was something else. Sitting and talking with Stew Pot in the dimly lit boxcar, she felt an aching, yearning feeling inside. She couldn't have said what it was exactly that she longed for. All she knew was that she felt closer to Stew Pot than she'd ever felt to anyone. She was very much aware that he was a boy, and she wanted him to know she was a girl. "Stew Pot," she began hesitantly. "Yeah?" Frankie decided to start with the easiest part. "I want to tell you something about me. I came from... My father was... well, he was a swell, I guess. I mean, he was very rich." To her astonishment, Stew Pot merely said, "I figured that." Frankie was quite taken aback. "How did you know?" "Lots of things," answered Stew Pot. Frankie was quiet, trying to think of what she had done to give herself away. Probably just about everything, she reflected wryly. She hadn't known anything when she first met Stew Pot. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "You said your father was rich," Stew Pot said, and waited. "Did he go broke?" "Yes," Frankie answered. She took a deep breath. "And then he... She faltered. "He shot himself." Stew Pot whistled under his breath. "That's tough luck, Blue," he said sympathetically. "There's another thing I want to tell you," Frankie said, then paused. Stew Pot looked at her, interested but not pushing. She stopped again. "Just say it," she told herself. "Well, the thing is," she began. Then, anxious to have it out and get it over with, she blurted, "I'm a girl. I mean, a frill." She waited, her whole body stiff with tension for Stew Pot's reaction. Would he be angry with her for deceiving him? Would he throw her off the train in disgust? No, she thought, Stew Pot wouldn't do that. But as soon as they stopped, he'd get away from her just as quickly as he could. And if that happened, she didn't think she could bear it. All Stew Pot said was, "I figured that too." "What?" Frankie exploded. "You knew I was a girl?" Stew Pot nodded, looking amused. "How did you know?" Frankie demanded. "When did you know?" She could feel her face flushing a deep red and was hoping that Stew Pot couldn't tell. "First day out," said Stew Pot, barely able to control his grin. "You did not! How did you... Frankie stopped sputtering and got control of herself. "How did you know?" she asked calmly. Well, for one thing, said Stewpot, when we bunked in the jungle, you gave me something to put under my head. In the morning, when I got a good look at it, it sure wasn't nothing a guy would wear. Thinking back, Frankie remembered. Stupid, 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 she thought. He'd probably spotted the blouse and pinafore and stockings in her bag countless other times as well. She'd never remembered to throw them out. There was other stuff, too, like when we was swimming. I mean, who swims in their skivvies? And the way you was going in the bushes all the time, and all that stuff that Omaha Red lifted off you, brushes and combs and all. And just the way you talk, you know? I'd have to be deaf, dumb, blind, and stupid not to know you was a frill. What about the way I talk? Frankie asked, feeling foolish now and defensive. Sure, maybe sometimes she forgot to deepen her voice, but still. You know, Stewpot hedged. No, said Frankie, I don't. What's the matter with the way I talk? Nothing's the matter, Stewpot said quickly. It's just that, well, his voice grew low, as if he were embarrassed. Sometimes you say nice things, frilly things. You know what I mean? Frankie puzzled over that. Finally she asked, don't boys say nice things? A guy might think something, but he wouldn't say it, you know? Makes him sound like a sissy. Oh, said Frankie, not sure she knew what he meant. But before she could figure it out, a new thought struck her. Did everybody know? Vera and Dot and Blink and Al? And everybody else we've met? Nah, said Stewpot, you're doing fine. It's just that we've been, spending so much time together. Still smarting at having been found out, Frankie didn't answer. She wasn't sure Stewpot was right, that she had fooled the others. Maybe he was just saying that to make her feel better. Stewpot added offhandedly, and I gotta say, you're pretty swell for a frill, Blue. You got guts. Frankie blushed all over again, this time with pleasure. Stewpot had known all along she was a girl, and he liked her anyway. He said she had guts. She thought it was the finest compliment she'd ever been given. So, Frankie Blue, Stewpot went on, what was your name when you was a swell? Frances Barrow. Frances Elizabeth Barrow. But there was a man. She stopped as a lump formed in her throat at the thought of Junius. He called me Frankie. Stewpot doffed his cap. James Haskell here. Pleased to meet you, Frances Elizabeth Barrow. Then he added as if he were remembering something long forgotten. My ma called me Jamie sometimes. Frankie looked at Stewpot, trying to see him as Jamie Haskell. It wasn't easy. He was Stewpot. Your ma? She asked carefully. Do you ever see her? No, I can't go back there. My old man used me for a punching bag, then he'd start in on her. Stewpot's words made Frankie's stomach flip-flop. She thought back to what Blink had said about Vera's home life and Dot's. They had run away to save themselves from things Frankie could never have imagined just a week ago. She thought about her father. She had often been afraid of disappointing him, but she had never feared that he would hit her. Was it hard times that made Stewpot's and Dot's father's and Vera's mother's boyfriend cruel and violent? No, she decided, that couldn't be it. Lots of people suffered mean circumstances without becoming mean themselves. Stewpot, for instance, and Peg Leg Al and Blink. They just kept going somehow, despite their hard times and their injuries. Vera and Dot had tried to leave their troubles behind and go on, and then there was her father, who, faced with difficult times, had chosen not to go on. Stew, she said, when Murph died, were you mad? Stewpot looked surprised. At who? At him. Stewpot thought for a moment. It sounds funny when you say it like that, but yeah, I guess I was, 'cause he was my partner, you know? And how could he do that to me? Frankie nodded, but that was just me feeling sorry for myself. I got over that pretty quick, and you know what I began to wonder? Frankie shook her head. What was hurting him so bad that he had to go and do that to himself? Frankie didn't answer. She was thinking about what Stewpot had said. Murph had killed himself slowly with booze. Her father's method was faster, but the result was the same. Stewpot's question was a good one. You think you know a guy, and Stewpot broke off with a shrug. Frankie pictured her father alone in his room with a gun and a despair so great he couldn't see past it. The anger she had felt for him began to ease, and in its place was an immense sorrow. She was sorry that he had felt such hopelessness, and sad to think she had never really known him. I'm gonna get a little shut-eye, Blue, Stewpot murmured. Frankie saw that his eyes were already closed. You been kinda stingy with that harmonica lately. How about it? She had almost forgotten about her harmonica. She took it out of her pocket and began to play. As she played, she thought about her father and Murph, and hoped that wherever they were, they had found some peace. She thought about Stewpot, and how he'd known all along that she was a girl. When she remembered all the small acts of kindness he had shown her over the past 4 days, She wondered if he'd have treated her differently if he'd thought she was a boy. Glancing at him, thinking she might ask, and saw that he was sleeping. Looking at his pale, freckled face, her heart swelled with affection and gratitude. He knew she was a girl, and he thought she was swell. She curled up beside him and soon was fast asleep herself. They were both still sleeping when the train came to a stop in the yard in St. Louis. "Guess we'll have to take our chances the bulls won't spot us," Stewpot said. Frankie cautiously slid the door a few inches to the side and peered out. Stewpot joined her, looked around, and shrugged. "Let's go." Frankie jumped out first. As she waited for Stewpot to join her, she heard a voice shout, "You there! You're under arrest!"